hear much anymore, and that's the word reverence. And so this morning I would ask, before we read Scripture, if you would stand out of reverence, please. We're going to be reading out of John chapter 20, and where we find ourselves, if you remember last week, we got to celebrate the risen Lord. And then Mary and the other women discovered Jesus was not in the tomb, and they even got to see Jesus, and they go running back to the disciples and tell them, and they don't believe them. And so two of the disciples we know ran to the tomb because of their doubt and to find out that, yes, there is no body in there. And then a little bit later on in the day, Jesus reveals himself to some disciples on the road to Damascus. And now when we read this passage, we find ourselves with the disciples up in a room, hiding behind locked doors. It is written, "So when it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and when the doors were shut where the disciples were, for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood in their midst and said to them, 'Peace be with you.' And when he had said this, he showed them both his hands and his side. The disciples then rejoiced. They saw the Lord. So Jesus said to them again, 'Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I also send you.' And when he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, 'Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, their sins have been forgiven. If you retain the sins of any, they have been retained.' But Jesus, one of the 12, called Didymus, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples were saying to him, 'We have seen the Lord.' But he said to them, 'Unless I see his hands, the imprints of the nails, and put my finger into the place of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe.' After the 8 days, his disciples were again inside, Thomas with them. Jesus came, the doors having been shut, and stood in their midst and said, 'Peace be with you.' Then he said to Thomas, 'Reach here with your finger and see my hands, and reach here your hand and put it into my side. And do not be unbelieving, but believing.' Then Thomas answered and said to him, 'My Lord and my God.' Jesus said to him, 'Because you have seen me, you believed? Blessed are they who did not see and yet believed.' Therefore, many other signs also performed in the presence of Jesus, which are not written in this book. But these have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name." These are the words of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. So I asked this question. Would you be willing to die for something you knew to be a lie? Under any circumstance, would you be willing to die? Would you be willing to give your last breath for something you thought could be true, but you have your doubts? Or maybe I'll bring it a little bit closer to home with doubt. I have some rocks in here. What if I said, and would you believe, I can light these rocks on fire? Or I have a bowl of ice, and I said, I can light this bowl of ice on fire. Would you believe me? Or would you doubt me? See, too often in society today, we impugn those who express doubt. We label them as non-believers. We label them as troublemakers. Yet doubt is not necessarily a negative or a bad thing. Galileo doubted the earth stood still. Copernicus doubted that the earth was the center of the universe. And Columbus doubted the earth was flat. Are we not glad that they did not allow their doubt to prevent them from challenging the beliefs of their time? Doubt is simply a feeling of uncertainty or a lack of conviction, or maybe calling into question the truth. But one should not feel guilty for doubting, and we should not put guilt on others because they doubt. Guilt only should come into play when we don't take action on our doubts. See, doubt is a diverging path to either discovery or death, or maybe even worse, idleness. Doubt should lead to investigation, because then an investigation leads to discovery. Wasn't that true for Galileo, Copernicus, and Columbus? We need to understand our faith is not the absence of doubt. Our faith is the means to overcome it. So this morning we read about this passage that is so frequently labeled about doubting Thomas. Now, doubting Thomas is nowhere that term biblically understood. That is what we as humanity, as society, has labeled Thomas and has labeled this passage, probably just so it's easier to find. But I question whether he deserves that calling. So I want to challenge you with possibly a paradigm shift. And a paradigm shift is when you believe one way and then you investigate or an incident takes place and all of a sudden the truth is revealed. One of the best examples I remember, somebody telling me this story about a gentleman who's going down the interstate, just booking it down the interstate, and he sees this little boy pop out of the ravine way off in the distance, and he thinks he's chucking rocks. And then he goes back into the ravine. And he sees him do this a couple times, and finally he comes up upon the boy, and sure enough, he comes up out of the ravine, throws the rock, cracks the windshield, and he slams on his brakes because he's going after that young boy. He gets out of the car, and he gets to the edge of the ravine. Sure enough, there's the young boy. And he's down on his knees next to the overturned car where his mom lay motionless. That's a paradigm shift. So today I want to see if maybe there's a paradigm shift when it comes to Thomas. Why is Thomas being called out for doubt? Did the other disciples not doubt the resurrection? They spent quality time in relationship with Mary and the other women, and yet when they came to the disciples did not believe them. And even Peter and John ran to the tomb and saw the empty tomb and still had doubt. And why were they surprised that Jesus wasn't there? He told them he wasn't going to be there. And why were they hiding up in a room behind closed doors instead of out looking for Jesus? There are so many good points in this one passage, and I'm only going to point out two of them. And then I do have, as usual, my call to action, because it does me no good to stand up here and pontificate and we don't put it into action. So point number one, get to know their story before you make your judgment call. How many times do we do that? We see something on TV or politicians, whatever, we make a judgment call pretty quick before we get to know their story. Why do we accept so easily the term doubting Thomas? Thomas is mentioned 8 times in the Bible. 4 of those times, his name is just simply listed with the other disciples, acknowledging he was one of them. But if we go further investigating, we go a little bit further back into the chapters, we learn what a loyal individual Thomas is, and that he is bought in to Jesus' mission. Because earlier, it talks about when Jesus is telling the disciples, we've got to go into the town of Bethany, the hometown of where Lazarus was raised. And the other disciples are pushing back and saying, Jesus, we can't go in there, our lives are on the line. And what does Thomas say to all the disciples? Let us also go that we might die with him. Does that sound like somebody who's doubting? That's a loyal person. That's somebody who's bought into Jesus and his mission. You know, we don't know where Thomas was on this night. It says all the disciples were there except for Thomas. For all we know, Thomas was out looking for Jesus. There may be a very good clue as to why Thomas doubts the disciples. And maybe it's because he demanded to see the scars of Jesus, because Thomas himself is possibly a continuous victim of misidentification. My daughter and I have the privilege of teaching karate, and we have these 3 boys who are in our school that are identical twins. I mean, you cannot tell them apart by their voice, their mannerisms, the way they spar. You can't tell them apart. Even their own dad has mistakenly called his boys by the wrong name. We have to write their names on the back of the equipment so we can at least try to give them proper affirmation for what they're doing. How much do you think those boys who live daily with misidentification, how much do you think they value other people saying what they saw? How much credibility and weight do they give others for what they saw? See, when we investigate further in here, it turns out Thomas is also, it's not hidden in the words, it's not read between the lines, it's right there in her face. It says, Thomas is known as Didymus, a twin. How many times could he have been misidentified? And just like the boys and their dad, maybe Thomas was even misidentified by his own disciples at times. So does it not make sense that he's going to say, I don't believe, I doubt who you saw until I see the evidence, until I investigate, and I see the very scars of Jesus? That's when I know I'm seeing my risen Lord. Point number 2, there is a difference between knowing of someone and knowing someone. You know, how many times have we seen on the news late at night, 11 o'clock, when a neighbor is being interviewed because their neighbor next door, who they lived next to for 10 years, turns out to be a serial killer or a spy, and they had no idea. And they go on telling, our children played together, you know, they captured my escaping pet so often. For 10 years, I thought I knew them. It happens all the time. In our own lives, when does an acquaintance get to be moved to labeled a friend? And when does a friend move over to being so deep in a relationship that we call them brother or sister? See, I believe it's more than just the passage of time. I think things take place for that to happen. Would you give a family heirloom that's been handed down generation after generation to somebody you know of? Would you ask somebody who only knows of you to be the godparent of your child? See, I read this and I go, why did Jesus not give the Holy Spirit to the disciples before this night? Would it not have made their lives infinitely easier if he gave it during the Last Supper or before he goes to the cross? Because then there would have been clarity. They would have known truth. They would have been able to understand better what was going on. Yet for some reason, Jesus did not give them the Holy Spirit yet until he breathed upon them on this night. I don't believe he gave them the Holy Spirit because they only knew of him. They didn't know him. The takeaway that I'd love for us to find a way to put into practice in our own lives, and this should be burned into our hearts so that the seed of doubt, which is the devil's greatest tool that he uses on us, will not have any impact. And this takeaway is to know this, that God's patience is mightier than your doubts. His abundance of patience is mightier than your sinful actions, and his patience is mightier than your shortcomings. I know I would have. I would believe all of us would give up on these disciples before this point. So my question is, who have you given up on? Is it a work employee who just refuses to give their very best and you said, I'm done investing in them? Maybe it's a sibling who will not help carry and bury the load of an ailing parent. Or maybe it's a child of yours or a friend of yours that you know who is an addict and they break promise after promise after promise. And you said, I'm done. Or maybe it's just simply a family member who just doesn't seem to believe in you. And you said, I'm done. I'm walking. I'm going to do it on my own. See, this is not a story about Thomas's doubt. What this story is really about is God's abundance abundant grace. And I don't want to simplify it. I think we have a habit too often to simplify it, and maybe that's so we can avoid guilt or not feel the conviction. Abundant grace does not simply mean God has forgiven our sins, or he's forgiving our sins, and we're, okay, thank you. I've got a God who's continuously willing to forgive our sins. It goes way, way deeper than that. Look at these disciples. They lived with him for 3 years, and he poured his wisdom, his teachings, his energies, his efforts into these men, day in and day out. They witnessed his miracles of healing the blind, the paralyzed, sick, raising Lazarus from the dead, the feeding of the 5,000, the walking on the water. He even shared the most intimate Last Supper with them, where he broke the bread and wine. And they even received confirmation of his rising. We would have walked. If we were in this room and showed up, I'm astonished at what Jesus did. I know I would have said, I am done. I am sick and tired. 3 years I have poured into you, given you my all. What am I doing here? I've gone to the cross. I accepted all the beatings and torturing. I'm going back to my Father. But Jesus doesn't do anything even close to that. What does he do? He says, peace be with you. Not once, but twice. And what he's saying is, in the moment of the trial, in the moment of the tragedy, have a calm spirit. You won't accomplish anything if you don't have a calm spirit in the moment of a trial. That's when truth is revealed. That's when clarity is revealed. And even more amazing, at that point, after he gave them the Holy Spirit, I would think he would just go up to be with his Father. He stays around for 40 more days to help guide the disciples. So my call to action is this. Is there someone that you've given up on who deserves more of your grace? And maybe it's not even us or you needing to give somebody else grace. Maybe today you understand that it's the scars in life that we recognize in people is when our relationships go deeper. When we recognize the trials that they face, the trials they've overcome, or maybe we've even been along their side and witnessed it. That's when the depth of a relationship takes place. And so maybe now, today, your eyes are opened up to the scars of Jesus, and you don't just know of him, maybe you now want to know him. I asked earlier if you doubted me if I could light these rocks on fire, or if I could light this ice on fire. And you would have been right if you doubted me about being able to light these. But what's cool with God He's the God of exponentialism. He's the God who can take more than one element, bring it together, and make the most of it. And so those who know of me may doubt me, but those who definitely know me, they know not to doubt me. Let's not doubt the abundance of God, the abundant grace of God. So in this moment of some silence, which is where the heart is typically convicted, if you have a desire to move from stopping to knowing of God and a desire to know God, please, that's why Ben's here, Steve's here, I'm here. We would consider it an honor to walk by your side in this path of knowing our risen Lord and Jesus Christ. Thanks be to God. I would ask that you please stand with me as we recite the Apostles' Creed, the foundation of our beliefs. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our God, who was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, dead, and buried. third day he rose from the dead. He ascended into heaven and sitteth at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From thence he shall come to judge the quick and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the union of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Amen.